He thought marriage would be his perfect revenge. She accepted her fate without having a clue what was coming. A secret from the past would turn everything into unstoppable chaos. But when the truth came out, it left everyone in shock. Before you dive into this story of betrayal, conspiracy, and an unexpected love, get ready for a twist that changes everything.
The Blackwood mansion gleamed under the starry sky of a spring night. The meticulously maintained gardens displayed white and red roses that stood out under the light of strategically positioned lanterns. It was the engagement night of Richard Blackwood, one of the most influential businessmen in American agribusiness, to Melissa Fontaine, heiress to a traditional Boston family. Guests circulated through halls decorated with natural flower arrangements and crystals that reflected the golden light of century-old chandeliers. Richard, in his impeccably tailored Italian suit, observed his fiancée from afar. Melissa was stunning in her navy blue dress, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in perfect waves. Her smile illuminated the environment as she chatted animatedly with the guests. Among the staff serving champagne and canapés was Helen Morgan, one of the mansion's most discreet employees. Her brown eyes observed everything attentively as she moved silently among the guests. No one paid attention to her, dressed in her black and white uniform, with her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Richard sipped his whiskey, satisfied with the direction his life was taking. At 35, he had finally found the perfect woman to share his empire with. Melissa wasn't just beautiful, but also intelligent and well-connected. The marriage would be the cherry on top of his already successful life. "Excuse me, sir," Helen murmured, as she passed by him with a tray. Richard barely noticed her presence, as had been the case during the 5 years she had worked in his house. To him, she was just another of the dozens of employees who kept his property running perfectly. The party was following its natural course when Richard decided to get some air in the gardens. The scent of roses drew him to a more secluded area, where the shadows of trees created a more intimate environment. It was then that he heard whispered voices coming from one of the gazebos. "We need to be more careful, my love." The female voice was unmistakable. "Melissa, Richard can't suspect anything until the wedding." Richard's heart froze as he recognized the second voice. "I can't stand pretending I'm just the gardener anymore when all I want is to shout to everyone that I love you." Paralyzed, Richard observed through the vines that partially covered the gazebo. His fiancée was in the arms of Peter, the gardener he himself had hired less than a year ago. Melissa's hands ran through the man's hair as they kissed passionately. Richard's world collapsed in that instant. Each carefully laid plan, each dream of a future with Melissa, everything shattered like a mirror hit by a stone. His first impulse was to confront them, but something held him back. An idea began to form in his mind, an idea born of pain and the desire for revenge. Silently, he moved away from the gazebo, returning to the party with an artificial smile on his lips. He continued to receive congratulations, to thank everyone for their presence, but inside, a plan was taking shape. Melissa wanted to play with his feelings. Very well. He would show her that he knew how to play too. During the rest of the night, his eyes began to observe each detail of the party with a new purpose. It was then that he noticed Helen again, serving drinks with her usual discretion. There was something about her, something he had never noticed before. A silent dignity, a beauty hidden beneath simple clothes and discreet makeup. As the last guests said their goodbyes, Richard had already made his decision. Melissa would learn the hard way that no one toyed with Richard Blackwood, and Helen, without knowing it, would be the main piece in his game of revenge. The next morning, while the mansion still slept, Richard called his lawyer. "Cancel all the wedding preparations," he ordered dryly, "and prepare new documents. I'm getting married, but not to Melissa Fontaine. The lawyer, accustomed to the whims of the rich, merely nodded. And who will be the bride, sir? Richard smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Helen Morgan, my maid. What Richard didn't know was that his impulsive decision would trigger a series of events that would forever change not only his life, but also the lives of everyone around him. Helen kept secrets that even she didn't know, and fate had chosen that moment to begin revealing them. Helen was organizing the mansion's library when Richard entered, closing the door behind him. She continued her work, expecting to receive some instruction about the organization of the books, as was common. However, what came next would change her life forever. "Helen, I have a proposal for you," said Richard, his voice controlled and cold. "I want you to marry me." The feather duster Helen was holding fell to the floor with a dull thud. She turned, slowly, certain that she had misunderstood. "Pardon me, sir?" "You heard me correctly. I want you to be my wife." Richard maintained a calculating look, studying her reactions. "The wedding will be held in a week. You'll receive a generous prenuptial contract and will have everything a lady of society needs." Helen felt the world spin. Less than 24 hours ago, this same man had celebrated his engagement to Melissa Fontaine. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "But you're engaged to Miss Melissa," she managed to stammer. "Not anymore," cut Richard dryly. "And I'm not interested in discussing this matter. I'm offering you a unique opportunity, Helen. Think carefully before refusing." Helen observed the man before her. For 5 years she had worked in his house, observing him from a distance, knowing his habits, his tastes, his temperament. She knew that Richard Blackwood was not a man to make proposals without ulterior motives. "Why me?" she finally asked, gathering courage. "Because I chose you," he responded simply. "You have until tomorrow to give me an answer." When Richard left the library, Helen collapsed into an armchair, trembling. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. On one hand, the proposal was absurd. On the other, perhaps it was her only chance. That night, in her small room at the back of the mansion, Helen opened an old wooden box that held her few personal belongings. At the bottom was a yellowed photo. A young, beautiful woman smiled, holding a baby. On the back, a single handwritten sentence: "For my dear Helen, may you never forget your origins." The photo was her only connection to a nebulous past. Her mother had worked in that same mansion years ago, but mysteriously disappeared when Helen was very young. She was raised by Mrs. Bennet, the oldest housekeeper in the home, who always avoided talking about the subject. Helen knew there was more to this story than she was told. The older people in the house sometimes looked at her strangely, as if they knew something she didn't, and now this unexpected marriage proposal. The next morning, Helen found Richard in his office. He was waiting for her, seated in his imposing leather chair, like a king on his throne. "I accept your proposal," she said, keeping her voice firm. Richard smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Excellent. My lawyer is all ready, preparing the documents. The wedding will be next Saturday, a simple ceremony at the courthouse." "I have just one condition." Helen surprised herself with her boldness. "I want to continue having access to the mansion's old archives." Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Why?" "Personal matters," she replied, holding his gaze. After a moment of silence, he agreed with a nod. "As you wish. Now you may leave. I'll send someone to help you with the preparations." In the days that followed, the mansion was taken over by an atmosphere of tension and gossip. Melissa, upon hearing the news, had a fit of fury and swore revenge. The staff was divided between disbelief and envy. Only Peter, the gardener, seemed strangely relieved. Helen observed everything with a mixture of apprehension and determination. At night, when everyone was asleep, she searched through the mansion's old archives, looking for clues about her mother. There was something in the Blackwood family's old documents that could explain her disappearance. She was sure of it. What Helen didn't know was that other eyes were watching her during her nightly searches. Anthony, Richard's younger brother, had noticed her suspicious movements, and he, more than anyone, knew the danger those archives represented. On the eve of the wedding, as Helen tried on her simple white dress, Mrs. Bennet entered the room, her eyes full of concern. "Child," said the housekeeper, "are you sure about what you're doing?" Helen adjusted the veil in front of the mirror. "I have nothing to lose, Mrs. Bennet, and maybe this is my chance to discover the truth." The old housekeeper sighed deeply. "There are truths, my dear, that are better left buried." That night Helen could barely sleep. Her last thought before falling into a restless sleep was that, regardless of Richard's reasons for this marriage, she would use this opportunity to unravel the mysteries of her past. What she didn't imagine was that her discoveries would shake the foundations of the Blackwood family in ways no one could predict. The civil wedding was quick and emotionless. Helen, wearing a simple white dress, and Richard, in a grey suit, exchanged rings before a sleepy judge and two witnesses, the family lawyer and Mrs. Bennet, who couldn't hold back her tears. When they returned to the mansion, the sun was already setting on the horizon, painting the sky in orange hues. Helen was led to what would be her new room, the master suite, a room larger than the entire apartment where she had lived in childhood with her mother. "Dinner will be served at 8, Richard informed her dryly before retiring to his office. Helen spent the following hours exploring her new space. The closet, larger than her old maid's room, was already stocked with designer clothes in her size. On the mahogany dresser, she found a jewelry box containing pieces that certainly cost a fortune. At 8 o'clock sharp, she went down for dinner. The table was set for two in the immense dining room, with all the pomp that Helen knew well. After all, she had been the one who had arranged that table countless times before. Richard was already waiting for her, serving himself red wine. His eyes widened momentarily when he saw her enter. Helen had allowed herself a transformation. Her hair, previously always tied back, now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. The emerald green silk dress found in the closet revealed a natural elegance that her old work clothes had never allowed to show. "Sit down," he commanded, quickly recovering from his surprise. Dinner passed in awkward silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. It was only when dessert was served that Richard finally spoke. "You will have access to a bank account tomorrow. Use it with discretion. I've also arranged for etiquette and social protocol lessons." "That won't be necessary," replied Helen, surprising him. "I've spent 5 years observing how high society behaves. I know very well how to act." Richard studied her with renewed interest. "You're more perceptive than you appear, aren't you?" "People tend to underestimate those they consider invisible," she replied, holding his gaze. An enigmatic smile appeared on Richard's lips. "And why did you agree to marry me, Helen? Don't tell me it was for love." "For the same reason you chose me, self-interest." The frankness of the response seemed to please him. "Very well. Then we have a tacit agreement. Maintain appearances in public, and you'll have everything you desire." After dinner, Helen retired to the bedroom, her heart beating rapidly. The night was not over, and she knew it. It was her wedding night after all. When she heard Richard's footsteps approaching down the corridor, she took a deep breath and let down her hair. The door opened, and Richard entered. He was about to say something, but the words died in his throat. Helen had removed the discreet makeup she had worn during the day, revealing features of a beauty he had never noticed before. Her eyes, which had always seemed ordinary brown, revealed themselves to be a unique amber tone, almost golden under the soft light of the bedside lamps. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice hoarse with surprise. "Someone you never bothered to know," she replied simply. Richard approached, as if hypnotized. His hand touched Helen's face, and she didn't back away. For a moment, the desire for revenge that consumed him gave way to something different, something he couldn't name. It was then that his eyes caught a detail on Helen's neck, a small gold medallion, partially hidden by the collar of her dress. His blood froze as he recognized the object. "Where did you get this?" he asked abruptly, holding the medallion. "It was my mother's," Helen replied, confused by his reaction. "The only memento I have of her." Richard released the medallion as if he had been burned. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly. "What was your mother's name?" he asked with a strangled voice. Isabel Morgan. She worked in this house a long time ago before." Richard staggered backward, leaning against the wall. "It can't be," he muttered. "This can't be happening." Helen approached, concerned about his reaction. "What is it? Why did this medallion affect you so much?" "Because," he replied, his voice barely a whisper, "I gave that medallion to Isabel 25 years ago. My father had given it to my mother, and I gave it to the woman I loved." The world seemed to stop spinning at that moment. Helen felt the floor disappear beneath her feet as the implications of that revelation began to take shape in her mind. "What exactly are you saying?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. "Isabel wasn't just a maid," Richard continued, his face a mask of horror. She was. Before he could complete the phrase, urgent knocks sounded at the door. It was Anthony, Richard's brother, with a grave expression on his face. "We need to talk," he said, casting a significant look at Helen. "Now." What should have been a wedding night had transformed into the beginning of a revelation that threatened to destroy not only the marriage of convenience, but the entire Blackwood empire. The tension was palpable in Richard's office. Helen observed the two brothers, feeling like an intruder in a theatre play for which she didn't know the script. Richard seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of minutes, while Anthony paced back and forth, nervous. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Anthony finally broke the silence, his voice heavy with accusation. "All the work we've done to keep this a secret. I didn't know," Richard exploded, punching the desk. "How could I imagine that Helen was, that I am what?" Helen interrupted, her patience wearing thin. "Can someone please explain to me what's going on?" The brothers exchanged tense looks before Anthony finally spoke. "Helen, what I'm about to tell you will change everything you believe you know about your life. Are you prepared for this?" She nodded, feeling her heart accelerate. "Isabel, your mother, wasn't just a maid in this house. She was our father's lover, August Blackwood." The shock of the revelation made Helen stagger. Richard quickly offered a chair, which she sat in, stunned. "But that means—" she began, unable to complete the thought. "Yes," Anthony confirmed. "You are August Blackwood's daughter, our half-sister." The silence that followed was deafening. Helen felt as if the entire world had been turned upside down. All her life, all the unanswered questions about her origin, suddenly gained a new and terrible meaning. "Why was I never told?" she asked, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Richard, who until then had remained silent, replied with a choked voice, "It was our father's decision. He loved Isabel, but he couldn't publicly acknowledge a child outside of marriage. The scandal would have destroyed our family, so he simply abandoned me, abandoned us." Helen questioned, the hurt evident in her voice. "It wasn't quite like that," Anthony intervened. August ensured that you and your mother were well taken care of, but away from society's eyes. The plan was, when you turned 18, to reveal the truth and officially integrate you into the family. But something went wrong, Richard continued. Isabel disappeared when you were only 5 years old. No one knew where she had gone or why. Helen felt a wave of nausea as she realized the implications. And you knew this the whole time, even when I returned to work here as a maid? The guilty look of the brothers was answer enough. I didn't know, Richard defended himself. I only discovered it now, seeing the medallion. Anthony and our father kept the secret from me, too. Anthony sighed heavily. It was necessary. Richard was very close to Isabel. When she disappeared, he was devastated. We thought it best that he didn't know the truth. Helen rose abruptly, unable to continue there. I need some air, she murmured, heading for the door. Wait, Richard called. There's more you need to know. She turned, exhausted. What else could there be? Your mother's disappearance. It wasn't accidental, Anthony revealed, his voice low and loaded with guilt. Someone forced her to leave. The shock of this new revelation made Helen stagger. Who? She asked, fearing the answer. Our mother, Richard replied, the shame evident on his face. She discovered the affair and threatened to expose everything if Isabel didn't disappear. Helen felt a rage like she had never experienced before. Her entire life had been shaped by lies and manipulations, and now, the man she had just married. You, she turned to Richard, her eyes flashing with fury. Did you know this when you asked me to marry you? No, he exclaimed, appearing genuinely horrified. I swear, Helen, I had no idea. I just wanted to use me as an instrument of revenge against Melissa, she completed, the understanding finally hitting her. What a cruel irony of fate. Without saying anything more, Helen left the office, leaving the two brothers in a silence laden with guilt and regret. She wandered the corridors of the mansion, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Reaching the garden, Helen allowed herself to collapse on a stone bench, the tears finally flowing freely. The scent of roses, which had previously brought her comfort, now seemed to suffocate her. It was then that a shadow was cast over her. Looking up, Helen was surprised to see Mrs. Bennet, the old housekeeper, standing in front of her. My dear, the lady said softly, I think it's time for you to know the whole truth. There are things about your mother and about yourself that not even the Blackwoods know. Intrigued and apprehensive, Helen followed Mrs. Bennet to an isolated part of the garden. There, hidden behind a creeper, was a small safe embedded in the wall. Your mother left this for you, Mrs. Bennet explained, opening the safe and removing a yellowed envelope. She made me promise that I would only deliver it when absolutely necessary. I think that moment has come. With trembling hands, Helen took the envelope. Inside, there was a letter and a series of documents that she instinctively knew would forever change the course of her life. As she began to read, Helen had no idea that at that exact moment, other events were unfolding in the mansion. Events that would make the night even more tumultuous and would reveal that the secrets of the Blackwood family were even deeper and more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Helen sat on the stone bench in the garden, her hands trembling as she held her mother's letter. Mrs. Bennet remained silent by her side, a comforting presence in the night that seemed to swallow everything else. With a deep sigh, Helen began to read, My dear daughter, if you are reading this letter, it means that the moment I so feared has come. There are truths that need to be revealed, however painful they may be. First, I need you to know that leaving you was the most difficult decision I ever made, but it was necessary to protect you and to protect an even greater secret than that of your true paternity. August, Blackwood wasn't just your father. He was a man divided between the love he felt for us and a dark world from which he couldn't free himself. The Blackwood family fortune, Helen, doesn't come just from agribusiness as everyone thinks. For years, August was involved in a complex money laundering scheme. Shell companies, offshore accounts, obscure political agreements, all of this sustained the empire that everyone admired. When I discovered the truth, it was already too late. I knew too much, and this put us in danger. It wasn't Catherine, August's wife, who forced me to leave. It was something much bigger and more dangerous. I received clear threats. If I didn't disappear, you would pay the price. So I did what any mother would do. I protected my child above all else. But before leaving, I ensured that the truth would not be lost. The documents that accompany this letter are evidence of all the Blackwoods' illicit activities. I kept them as insurance, hoping they would never need to be used. Helen, my love, what you will do with this information is your choice. But remember, knowledge is power, and power always comes with a price. I cannot ask for your forgiveness for having left you, but I hope that one day you will understand that every decision I made was driven by the unconditional love I feel for you. Be strong, my daughter. You have more courage and intelligence than you imagine. With all my love, Isabel. Silent tears ran down Helen's face as she finished reading. Her hands trembled as she held the documents that accompanied the letter. Contracts, bank statements, printed emails, all painting a somber picture of the Blackwood family's business dealings. "Mrs. Bennet," Helen whispered, her voice choked. "Did you know all of this?" The old housekeeper nodded sadly. "Just enough to fulfill my promise to your mother. Isabel trusted me to protect you and this information until the right moment." Helen stood up, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. "What should I do now?" Before Mrs. Bennet could respond, a scream echoed from the mansion, followed by the sound of breaking glass. The two women exchanged alarmed looks before running back to the house. In the main hall, they found a chaotic scene. Richard and Anthony were engaged in a heated argument, while Melissa, Richard's ex-fiancée, screamed hysterically, pointing at Helen. "You liar! Thief! You planned all of this, didn't you?" Melissa screamed, her eyes injected with fury. Richard tried to restrain her, but she broke free, advancing toward Helen. "You think you can just enter this family and steal everything? I know who. You really are." Helen backed away, shocked by the violence of the accusation. "What are you talking about?" It was Anthony who answered, his voice loaded with contempt. "She thinks you're a con artist, Helen, that somehow you discovered your kinship with our family and arranged all of this to marry Richard and claim your part of the inheritance." "That's ridiculous," Helen exclaimed, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of more glass breaking. Peter, the gardener and Melissa's ex-lover, had entered the room, looking agitated. "Melissa, stop this! You don't understand. This is bigger than all of us." Confusion increased, with everyone shouting at the same time. It was then that Catherine, the family matriarch, entered the hall. Her cold gaze swept over the scene before settling on Helen. "So it's true," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "August's bastard has finally come back to claim what she thinks is hers." The silence that followed was deafening. Helen felt all eyes on her, judging her, condemning her, but something inside her strengthened. Raising her chin, she looked Catherine in the eyes. "I didn't come to claim anything," Helen declared firmly. "But now that I know the truth, maybe it's time for all of us to put our cards on the table." With steady hands, she removed the documents her mother had left from the pocket of her dress. "I think we have a lot to discuss, don't we?" Catherine's face paled at the sight of the papers. Anthony stepped forward, his expression a mixture of fear and anger. Richard seemed lost, divided between loyalty to his family and the growing understanding of the situation. At that moment, with revelations hanging in the air like a storm about to break, Helen realized there was no going back. The decisions she would make in the next few hours would not only shape her future, but could very well destroy the Blackwood Empire once and for all. Outside the mansion, the lights of police cars began to flash, approaching rapidly. Someone had made a call, and now time was running out for everyone. The blue and red lights of the police vehicles illuminated the mansion's garden, casting distorted shadows through the windows of the hall. The sound of sirens broke the tense silence that had settled after Helen's revelations. "What have you done?" whispered Catherine, her gaze oscillating between Helen and the windows. Helen, still holding the documents, replied firmly, "I didn't do anything. But it seems that the past has finally caught up with us." At that moment, Anthony ran for the back door, but was stopped by Peter, the gardener, who grabbed him with surprising strength. "Not so fast," said Peter, revealing a police badge hidden in his pocket. "Nobody's going anywhere." The revelation fell like a bomb in the hall. Melissa, who until then had seemed hysterical, suddenly became strangely calm. "You knew about this?" she asked Richard, who shook his head, as surprised as everyone else. Strong knocks sounded at the main door. "Federal Bureau of Investigation! Open the door!" Catherine, recovering part of her composure, addressed Helen. "Whatever you think you know, there's still time to resolve this as a family. Don't throw away everything your father built." Helen felt the weight of the words, but before she could respond, Richard intervened. "Enough lies, Mother. It's time to face the consequences of our actions." With a resigned nod, he headed to the door to let the agents in. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. FBI agents invaded the mansion, led by a middle-aged man with shrewd eyes who introduced himself as Agent Rodriguez. "We have a search and arrest warrant," he announced, displaying an official document. "This residence and all its occupants are under investigation for suspicion of money laundering, tax evasion, and organized crime." As the agents began to search the house, Agent Rodriguez approached Helen. "Miss Morgan, I presume. We have much and to discuss." Helen nodded, handing over the documents she was holding. "I think this might help with your investigation, Agent." Rodriguez's face lit up as he quickly examined the papers. "This changes everything," he murmured. In the following minutes, the mansion transformed into a scene from a police movie. Computers were seized, safes opened, and piles of documents confiscated. Catherine, Anthony, and several high-ranking company officials were detained for questioning. Richard, although not handcuffed, was informed that he should accompany the agents to provide clarification. Before leaving, he approached Helen, his eyes full of a mixture of regret and admiration. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for everything. You deserve to know the truth from the beginning." Helen looked at him, feeling a wave of contradictory emotions. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive, but I understand that you were also a victim in this story." As Richard was led away, Helen found herself alone in the midst of chaos. It was then that Mrs. Bennet approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," said the housekeeper. "You did the right thing, even though the path is difficult." Helen nodded, silent tears streaming down her face. "And now, what happens to me?" Agent Rodriguez, who had overheard the conversation, approached. "Miss Morgan, your cooperation will be fundamental to unraveling the full extent of this scheme. We'll need your help in the coming days." "And what about my situation?" asked Helen, suddenly conscious of her precarious position. "Technically, I'm part of this family now." Rodriguez smiled gently. "Legally, yes, but the initial evidence suggests you had no participation in the crimes. In fact, your actions today may have helped dismantle one of the largest money laundering operations in the country." At that moment, watching the agents take away members of the Blackwood family and staff, Helen felt the weight of years of secrets and lies dissipating. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt free. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden light over the mansion's gardens. It was a new day, not just for Helen, but for everyone involved in this complex plot of power, greed, and redemption. As she was led outside the property to give her statement, Helen cast one last look at the imposing Blackwood mansion. What before had seemed a symbol of opulence and power now revealed itself as a facade for decades of corruption and dark secrets. With a deep sigh, she entered the police car, leaving behind not just the house but also the weight of an identity built on lies. The path ahead would be difficult, but Helen was determined to face it with the same courage her mother had demonstrated years ago. The Blackwood mansion was left behind, diminishing in the rearview mirror as Helen headed toward an uncertain future, but finally her own. The days that followed the police operation at the Blackwood mansion were a whirlwind of statements, investigations, and shocking revelations. Helen found herself at the center of a media hurricane, with journalists camped day and night in front of the hotel where she was staying under police protection. In her hotel room, she watched the news with a mixture of fascination and horror. The magnitude of the Blackwood family's corruption scheme was greater than she could ever have imagined. Shell companies scattered across tax havens, high-ranking politicians involved, even NGOs being used to launder money. The empire her biological father had built was a house of cards that was now collapsing before the eyes of the entire country. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Agent Rodriguez, accompanied by a woman Helen didn't know. "Miss Morgan," said Rodriguez, "this is Assistant District Attorney Camilla Wells from the Federal Prosecutor's Office. She would like to speak with you about some details of the case." Helen nodded, inviting them in. Ada Wells, a middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes behind thin-framed glasses, got straight to the point. "Helen, first of all, I want to thank you for your cooperation. The information you provided was crucial in unraveling this web of corruption. However, some complications have arisen." Helen felt a chill down her spine. What kind of complications? Camilla exchanged a look with Rodriguez before continuing. "We discovered that your mother, Isabel, not only knew about August Blackwood's schemes, but also actively participated in some operations." The revelation hit Helen like a punch to the stomach. "No, that can't be true. My mother was a victim. She was more complex than you imagine," Rodriguez gently interrupted. "The documents she left for you were just a part of the story. Isabel was preparing to expose the entire scheme when she disappeared." Helen sat down, suddenly feeling dizzy. So what happened to her? Why did she really disappear? Camilla sighed deeply. "We believe she entered the witness protection program, but, Helen insisted, feeling there was more to come. "But we lost track of her a few years ago," Rodriguez completed. "It's possible she decided to disappear completely, or he didn't need to finish the sentence." Helen understood the implications. Her mother could be dead, silenced by those she threatened to expose. "Why are you telling me this now?" Helen asked, her voice trembling. "Because," Camilla answered, "we found evidence that someone is trying to regain control of the Blackwood's illegal operations, even with the main individuals involved in custody. And we believe that person might be after you." The fear Helen felt was momentarily overshadowed by a sudden realization. "Anthony," she murmured. "He always seemed to know more than he let on." Rodriguez nodded. "Anthony Blackwood escaped custody last night. We believe he had internal help." "What does this mean for me?" Helen asked, trying to stay calm. "It means you need protection," said Camilla, "and it also means we need your help to attract Anthony and his accomplices." Helen took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision she needed to make. Helping would mean putting herself in danger, but it could also be the key to finally discovering the whole truth about her family and, perhaps, about her mother's fate. "What exactly do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice firm, despite the fear. Rodriguez and Camilla exchanged looks of approval. "We want you to return to the Blackwood mansion," said the agent. "Under our protection, of course. We'll spread the news that you've taken control of the family's legitimate businesses that should attract Anthony and his allies." "It will be dangerous," warned Camilla, "but it may be our best chance to completely dismantle this criminal organization and, who knows, find answers about your mother." Helen was silent for a few moments, weighing her options. Finally, with a determined look, she nodded. "I'll do it." As the three began to outline the details of the plan, Helen couldn't help but think about how drastically her life had changed in such a short time. From maid to heiress, from victim to key piece in a police operation, each twist seemed more surreal than the last. Outside the hotel, the sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows that seemed to foreshadow the challenges to come. Helen knew she was about to dive even deeper into the dark world her biological father had created, but now, armed with the truth and determined to do justice, she was ready to face whatever fate had in store for her. Night was falling, and with it, the preparations for the next act of this family drama began to take shape. Helen Morgan, the reluctant heiress, was about to become the bait in a dangerous game of cat and mouse where the stakes couldn't be higher. Morning was grey when the car carrying Helen passed through the gates of the Blackwood mansion. The garden, once impeccable, now showed signs of neglect after days without the meticulous attention of the gardeners. The house, once a symbol of opulence and power, seemed strangely empty and somber. Helen took a deep breath before exiting. The vehicle, dressed in an elegant grey suit and high heels, she seemed the personification of a powerful heiress. Exactly the image they needed to project for the plan to work. "Remember," said Agent Rodriguez, who accompanied her disguised as her driver, "the mansion is filled with hidden microphones and cameras. We're monitoring everything 24 hours a day. At the slightest sign of danger, we'll intervene." Helen nodded, feeling the weight of the small tracking device hidden in her necklace. "Understood. Let's do this." Upon entering the house, she was greeted by Mrs. Bennet, the only staff member who had remained after the scandal. The old housekeeper's eyes were misty. "Miss Helen? Ma'am, welcome back." Thank you, Mrs. Bennet." Helen smiled, genuinely happy to see a friendly face. "Please continue to call me Helen." The two women walked to the main office, now designated as Helen's new operations center. The imposing mahogany desk, previously occupied by August Blackwood, now seemed intimidating with its empty vastness. Helen sat down, trying to appear comfortable in her new role. "Mrs. Bennet, could you bring me the most recent financial reports of the companies? We need to start putting order in this mess." As the housekeeper left to fetch the documents, Helen turned on the computer, knowing that each key pressed was being monitored by the investigation team. Her task was twofold: to appear to be taking control of the family's legitimate businesses while looking for clues that could lead to Anthony and his accomplices. The hours passed slowly. Helen immersed herself in spreadsheets, contracts, and emails, trying to decipher the complex tangle of Blackwood businesses. Around noon, an email notification caught her attention. The sender was unknown, but the subject made her heart race. For the true heiress. With slightly trembling hands, she opened the message. "Helen, not everything is as it seems. There are secrets that not even the police know. If you want to know the truth about your mother, meet me tonight at midnight at the old garden gazebo. Come alone. A friend. Helen read the message several times, her mind in turmoil. It should be a trap, right? But what if it was really someone with information about her mother? Before she could make a decision, she heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, she closed the email and returned her attention to the documents in front of her. Richard entered the office, looking tired and worn. After giving his statement to the police, he had been released but remained under surveillance. "Helen," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, I don't know where to begin to apologize." She looked at him, feeling a confusing mixture of emotions, anger, pity, and something else she couldn't define. "Richard, I think we're past the point of apologies, aren't we?" He nodded sadly. "You're right. I just wanted you to know that I'm willing to fully cooperate with the investigations, and if there's anything I can do to help." "Actually," Helen interrupted, an idea forming in her mind, "there is something. I need you to tell me everything you know about your father's and Anthony's secret business dealings. Every detail, no matter how small it seems." Richard seemed to hesitate for a moment, but then began to speak. For hours, he unraveled a complex web of suspicious transactions, names of involved politicians, and locations of secret meetings. Helen absorbed every word, knowing that the authorities were recording everything. When night fell, Richard withdrew, leaving Helen alone with her thoughts. The clock marked 11:30. The half-hour that separated her from the mysterious meeting in the garden seemed to drag on. Finally, unable to resist the temptation of possible answers about her mother, Helen made a decision. Silently, she deactivated the tracker in her necklace and left it on the desk. With her heart racing, she headed to the garden, the night shadows seeming to swallow her. The old gazebo was covered with vines, creating an almost claustrophobic environment. Helen looked at her watch. Midnight on the dot. "Hello," she called, softly, her voice trembling slightly. A movement in the shadows made her turn abruptly. A figure slowly emerged from the darkness, and Helen suppressed a cry of surprise. "It can't be you?" The person before her smiled enigmatically, their eyes shining with knowledge that promised to change everything Helen believed she knew. At that moment, standing alone in the dark garden, she realized she was about to dive even deeper into the abyss of the Blackwood family's secrets. "Peter," Helen whispered, incredulous, as she recognized the ex-gardener and undercover officer. "What are you doing here? I thought you were with the investigation team." Peter smiled sadly, his face partially hidden by the shadows of the gazebo. "Things aren't always what they seem, Helen. There's much more to this story than you or even the police know." Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. "You said you had information about my mother. What do you know?" Peter looked around, as if afraid of being observed before speaking. "Your mother, Isabel, didn't enter the witness protection program as everyone thinks. She's alive, Helen, and closer than you imagine." The shock of the revelation made Helen stagger. She leaned against one of the gazebo's columns, feeling the world spin around her. How do you know this? Where is she?" "I helped her disappear," Peter confessed. "I was assigned to protect her years ago, long before I infiltrated as a gardener. But things got complicated." "Complicated how?" Helen demanded, her voice a mixture of hope and fear. Peter sighed deeply. Isabel discovered that the corruption scheme went far beyond the Blackwood family. There are powerful people involved, people who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. When she threatened to expose everything, we had no choice but to fake her disappearance." Helen processed the information, her mind in a whirlwind. But why didn't she contact me all these years? Why let me believe she was dead? To protect you, Peter replied softly. The less you knew, the safer you would be. But now, with everything that's happened, Isabel feels it's time for you to know the truth. She wants to see you, Helen. Helen's heart accelerated. After so many years, the possibility of seeing her mother again seemed almost unreal. Where is she? When can I see her? Peter looked at his watch. Now, but we need to be careful. There are eyes and ears everywhere, and not all of them are the police's. At that moment, the sound of approaching footsteps made both of them turn abruptly. Richard emerged from the shadows, his face a mask of concern and confusion. Helen? What's going on here? He asked, looking suspiciously at Peter. Before Helen could respond, Peter drew a gun, pointing it at Richard. Don't move, he ordered. You shouldn't be here. Peter, no! Helen shouted, placing herself between the two men. Richard isn't a threat. He's cooperating with the investigations. Peter hesitated but kept the gun raised. We can't trust him, Helen. He's a Blackwood. And so am I, it seems, Helen retorted. Lower the gun, Peter. If we're going to do this, we'll do it my way. After a tense moment, Peter finally lowered the gun. Helen turned to Richard, who seemed stunned by the situation. Richard, I know we have no reason to trust each other, but I need you to trust me now, she said, looking him in the eyes. My mother is alive, and I'm going to find her. You can come with us and finally learn the whole truth, or you can go back to the mansion and pretend none of this happened. The choice is yours. Richard looked from Helen to Peter, then back to Helen. His face reflected an internal struggle, years of family loyalty against the desire for redemption. I'll go, he finally said. I'm tired of lies and secrets. If there's a chance to fix at least part of the harm my family has caused, I want to take it. Helen nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. She turned to Peter. Where are we going? There's a car waiting at the back of the property, he answered. But we need to be quick and silent, if Anthony or his men catch us. He didn't need to finish the sentence. All three knew the stakes were too high. Moving like shadows through the garden, they headed to the back of the property. Helen could feel her heart beating hard against her chest, adrenaline running through her veins. She was about to reunite with her mother after so many years, to discover truths that could change everything. When they reached the car, a discreet black sedan, Peter opened the back door. Helen hesitated for a moment, casting one last look at the Blackwood mansion. That house, which for so long had been her workplace and then the setting for so many revelations, now seemed small and insignificant in light of what was to come. Ready? Peter asked softly. Helen took a deep breath and entered the car, followed by Richard. As Peter started the engine and the vehicle slid silently down the dark road, Helen felt she was leaving behind not just the mansion, but a whole life of uncertainties and half-truths. The destination was uncertain, the dangers were real, but for the first time in a long time, Helen felt she was on the right path to discovering who she really was and what her place was in this complex plot that was her life. As the car accelerated into the night, taking them to a meeting that promised to reveal long-buried secrets, Helen couldn't help but think that finally the pieces of her life's puzzle were beginning to fit together. But was she really prepared for the final image that would form? The car wound through increasingly narrow and dark roads. Helen observed the landscape change through the window, the city being left behind, giving way to fields, and then to a dense forest. Beside her, Richard remained silent, his expression a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. After almost 2 hours of travel, Peter finally slowed down, turning onto an almost imperceptible dirt road. "We're arriving," he announced, his voice tense. The car stopped in front of a small wooden house, almost hidden among the trees. The lights were on, and Helen felt her heart accelerate when she saw a silhouette moving behind the curtains. "She's waiting for you," Peter said softly. "Go. Richard and I will wait here." With trembling legs, Helen got out of the car and walked to the door. Before she could knock, it opened, revealing a middle-aged woman, grey hair framing a face that, despite the years, Helen instantly recognized. "Mom," she whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Isabel Morgan smiled, her own eyes watery. "My dear Helen," she said, opening her arms. The embrace that followed was loaded with years of longing, unanswered questions, and repressed love. For several minutes, mother and daughter simply held each other, letting the tears flow freely. When they finally separated, Isabel guided Helen inside the house. The interior was simple but welcoming, filled with books and a few personal items. "I know you must have 1,000 questions," Isabel began, indicating for Helen to sit down, "and I promise to answer all of them. But first, I need you to understand the why of all this." Helen nodded, unable to take her eyes off her mother, fearing she might disappear at any moment. Isabel took a deep breath before starting. "When I discovered the extent of the corruption involving the Blackwoods and their associates, I realized I was dealing with something much bigger and more dangerous than I had imagined. It wasn't just a rich family involved in shady business, but an intricate network that extended to the highest levels of government, the judiciary, and even international organizations." "But why disappear?" Helen asked, her voice choked. "Why leave me?" Isabel's eyes filled with pain. "It was the hardest decision of my life, darling, but I had evidence, information that could bring down very powerful people. If I had stayed, if I had tried to expose everything at that moment, not only would my life have been at risk, but yours as well." Helen processed the information, feeling a mixture of understanding and hurt. "And all these years, why did you never get in touch?" "I watched you from afar," Isabel confessed. "Peter kept me informed. Seeing you grow, become the strong woman you are today, was what gave me strength to continue. But each day away from you was torture." At that moment, a knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Peter entered, followed by Richard, who seemed uncomfortable. "Sorry to interrupt," Peter said, "but we have company, several cars approaching on the road." Isabel's face paled. "They found us. We need to go now." "Wait!" Helen exclaimed. "Who are they? And where are we going?" Isabel ran to a cabinet, removing a thick folder. "There's no time to explain everything now, but this," she said, handing the folder to Helen, "contains all the evidence, all the names, all the connections. It's the key to dismantling the entire organization." Richard, who until then had remained silent, stepped forward. "May I see that?" Isabel hesitated, but Helen nodded. As Richard quickly leafed through the documents, his face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, and finally, determination. "My God," he murmured, "this goes beyond anything I imagined. Helen, your mother is right. This needs to come to light, no matter the cost." The sound of approaching cars broke the moment. Peter, who was at the window, warned, "We have to go. Now!" The four ran to the back of the house, where a jeep was hidden among the trees. As Peter started the engine, Helen saw flashlights approaching the house they had just left. "Where are we going?" she asked, holding the folder with the evidence tightly. Isabel, seated beside her, held her hand. "To the only place where we can be safe and, at the same time, expose the whole truth. We're going to the capital. It's time to face this corruption head-on." As the jeep accelerated through the dark forest, Helen felt a mixture of fear and determination. The reunion with her mother, the shocking revelations, the pursuit, everything seemed surreal. But one thing was certain: there was no going back. The next chapter of this story would be written in the nation's capital, and the consequences would affect not just the Blackwood family, but the entire country. Richard, seated in the front seat, turned back, his gaze meeting Helen's. At that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Regardless of their complicated past, they were now together on this dangerous journey in search of truth and justice. The night swallowed the jeep as it advanced, carrying with it the hopes and fears of its occupants. The destination was uncertain, but the determination was unshakable. The truth, for so long buried, would finally come to light, no matter the cost. The jeep advanced along the dark road, the headlights cutting through the darkness of the night. Helen, seated in the back seat next to her mother, kept the folder with the documents firmly pressed against her chest. Each jolt of the vehicle seemed to emphasize the importance of what they carried. "We need a plan." Richard broke the tense silence. "We can't just show up in Washington, D.C. and expect everything to work out." Isabel nodded. "You're right. I have a contact in the Department of Justice. She's been investigating this corruption network for years, but never had enough evidence to act. How can we be sure we can trust her?" Peter asked, eyes fixed on the road. "Marianne Royce is incorruptible," Isabel replied with confidence. "She's risked her career and her life several times trying to expose this organization. If there's anyone we can trust, it's her." Helen, who until then had been silently absorbing everything she heard, finally spoke. "But how will we reach her? I'm sure they're monitoring all our movements." Richard turned in the passenger seat, his face illuminated by the occasional light posts. They passed. "I can help with that. I still have contacts in Washington who aren't involved in this scheme. We can use my name to arrange a discreet meeting." The group agreed with the plan, and Richard made some calls using a disposable phone that Peter had brought. After several tense conversations and exchanged codes, he finally turned to the others with a tired smile. "It's done. We have a meeting scheduled with Prosecutor Marianne Royce tomorrow at noon, but we'll have to be extremely careful until then." As the jeep continued its nocturnal journey, Helen couldn't help but reflect on how drastically her life had changed. In such a short time, just a few weeks ago, she was a simple domestic employee, and now she was at the center of a conspiracy that threatened to shake the structures of power in the country. Looking at her mother, Helen felt a wave of contradictory emotions: love, anger, relief, hurt, everything mixed in her chest. As if sensing her internal turmoil, Isabel held her hand. "I know I have a lot to make up for," she said softly, "but I promise that after all this is over, we'll have all the time in the world to reconnect." Helen nodded, squeezing her mother's hand. There was so much to be said, so many questions to be asked, but now was not the time. As the night progressed, fatigue began to weigh on everyone. Peter suggested they stop at a small roadside inn to rest for a few hours. Although reluctant to stop, everyone agreed they needed to be alert for what awaited them in Washington. At the simple and discreet inn, they divided into two small rooms. Helen and Isabel stayed in one, while Richard and Peter occupied the other. Before separating, they agreed to leave at dawn. In the room, lying on the narrow bed next to her mother, Helen finally allowed the tears she had been holding back to escape. Isabel embraced her, whispering words of comfort and requests for forgiveness. "Mom," Helen whispered between sobs, "I'm afraid. What if we don't succeed? What if it's too late?" Isabel caressed her daughter's hair as she did when she was small. "It's never too late to do the right thing, my love, and remember, the truth always finds a way to come to light. We just need to be brave enough to let it shine." The first light of morning found the group already up, ready to resume the journey. As they had a quick coffee in the inn's small restaurant, they noticed a man watching them from a corner. Peter immediately became alert. "We need to go," Now, he murmured, rising casually. They left hurriedly, getting into the jeep. They had barely left the parking lot when they saw two black cars coming out from behind the inn, following them. "They found us," Richard said, his voice tense. Peter stepped hard on the accelerator, and the jeep shot down the road. The chase had begun, and with it, a desperate race against time. There were only a few hours until the meeting with Prosecutor Marianne Royce, and the fate of the entire country could depend on them arriving on time. As the jeep zigzagged down the road, trying to shake off their pursuers, Helen clung to the folder with the evidence, knowing that those documents were the key to exposing all the corruption. Fear and adrenaline ran through her veins, but along with them came a fierce determination. No matter what happened, she would do everything in her power to ensure that the truth came to light. The road stretched ahead of them, leading them toward Washington, D.C., and a confrontation that promised to change the course of the country's history. The next chapter of this saga was about to be written, and Helen knew it would be the most dangerous and decisive of all. The midday sun punished the National Mall when the jeep, with screeching tires, entered Washington, D.C. The pursuit had been intense, but thanks to Peter's skill behind the wheel and some risky maneuvers, they managed to shake off their pursuers on the outskirts of the capital. Helen, with disheveled hair and her heart still racing, clung to the folder with the evidence as if her life depended on it. And in a way, it did. Richard, in the front seat, made frantic calls, confirming the location of the meeting with Prosecutor Marianne Royce. "Change of plans," he announced, hanging up the phone. "We can't risk going to the Justice Department building. Marianne will meet us in the basement of the Capitol." Peter skillfully maneuvered through Washington's wide avenues, his eyes alert for any sign that they were being followed again. Isabel held Helen's hand, both tense, knowing they were about to change the course of the country's history. As they approached the imposing Capitol building with its iconic dome, Helen felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Everything they had gone through, all the revelations and dangers, culminated in this moment. The group quickly got out of the jeep, entering through a little-noticed side door. They followed labyrinthine corridors until they reached a discreet meeting room in the basement. There, a middle-aged woman with penetrating eyes awaited them. "Prosecutor Marianne Royce," she introduced herself, her gaze evaluating each of them. "I have only 20 minutes before my absence is noticed. Show me what you have." Helen handed the folder to the prosecutor, who immediately began to leaf through the documents. Her eyes widened with each page turned, and she occasionally let out exclamations of surprise and indignation. It's unbelievable," Marianne murmured, looking at Isabel. "You managed to gather evidence against practically the entire power structure. This will shake the country to its foundations. That's why we need to act quickly," Isabel replied. "The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes for all of us." Marianne nodded, her face a mask of determination. "I'll convene a task force immediately. We'll need protection for all of you and—" Her words were interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps in the corridor. The door opened violently, revealing Anthony Blackwood, accompanied by two men in suits. "Well, well," he said, a cruel smile on his lips. "What an interesting meeting we have here." Peter drew his gun, but Anthony's men were faster, pointing their own weapons at the group. "Lower your weapons!" An authoritative voice echoed down the corridor. Agent Rodriguez appeared, accompanied by a team of federal agents. "Anthony Blackwood, you're under arrest." Chaos broke out in the small room. Anthony tried to flee but was quickly immobilized. His accomplices, seeing themselves outnumbered, surrendered. Helen, still stunned by the sudden turn of events, looked at Rodriguez. "How?" The agent smiled. "Did you really think we'd let you leave the mansion without protection? We've been following you the whole time, keeping our distance so as not to alert the real pursuers. Marianne Royce, recovering from the shock, raised the folder with the evidence. With this and today's arrests, we have everything we need to dismantle the entire corruption network. In the hours that followed, the country watched in astonishment as a series of high-profile arrests took place. Politicians, businessmen, judges, no one was immune. The operation, which became known as Operation Revealed Truth, shook the power structures like never before in America's history. Helen, observing everything from a safe location alongside her mother, Richard, and Peter, felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The worst was over, but she knew the path ahead would still be long and difficult. Weeks later, at a press conference, Helen stood beside prosecutor Marianne Royce. Her story, that of a simple maid who became a key piece in the country's largest anti-corruption operation, had captured the public's imagination. "What would you say to people who are losing faith in justice?" asked a journalist. Helen thought for a moment before answering. "I would say that the truth always finds a way. It may take time, it may be difficult and dangerous, but in the end, if we have the courage to face the challenges, justice will prevail." Later, away from the cameras, Helen met with her mother, Richard, and Peter. There was still much to be resolved between them, many wounds to be healed, but they were united by something greater than their personal differences. "And now?" asked Richard, seeming for the first time in weeks at peace with himself. Helen looked at each of them before answering. "Now we rebuild, not just our lives, but we help rebuild people's trust in institutions. Our story doesn't end here. In fact, it's just the beginning." As the sun set over Washington, casting a golden glow over the buildings that symbolized the nation's power, Helen felt a sense of hope that she hadn't experienced in a long time. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, she truly felt free to write her own destiny. The truth had been revealed, and with it, the promise of a new dawn for the country. Helen knew that her personal journey of discovery and redemption was far from over, but now she had something that had long been denied to her, a future full of possibilities. Dear listeners, we hope that Helen's journey has captivated and inspired you. This story of courage, truth, and redemption reminds us that each of us has the power to make a difference, no matter how impossible the situation may seem. To continue exploring equally engaging and moving stories, we've prepared a special playlist with narratives that challenge the status quo and inspire change. You can find it by clicking on the link to the left. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Your support allows us to continue bringing stories that not only entertain, but also provoke important reflections about our society. Every day, we bring new narratives that explore the complexity of life and the challenges we face as individuals. And as a society, don't miss our upcoming content. Let us know in the comments, what would you do if you were in Helen's place? How did this story resonate with your own experiences? Remember, as Helen discovered, the truth always finds a way. Sometimes all we need is the courage to take the first step.